some aspect of Buddhism because many people ask, what is Buddhism? The name Buddhism comes from the word Buddha, which means the wake up. And thus, Buddhism is the philosophy of awakening. Some may think that Buddhism is only philosophy, it's not religion. This philosophy has its origins in the experience of the man named Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, who was himself awakened at the age of 36 years old. Buddhism is now 2,600 years ago and has about 500 million followers worldwide. Until 100 years ago, Buddhism was merely an Asian philosophy, but increasingly in the Europe and America. So nowadays, the temple and Buddhist spread all over the world. So Buddhism is just a philosophy or the way of life. This is a normal question I has been asked from many students. So the word philosophy comes from the words philo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. So philosophy is the love of wisdom, and love and wisdom. Both the meanings describe Buddhism perfectly. Buddhism teaches us that we should love or develop our intellectual capacity to the full first so that we can understand clearly. It also teaches us to develop love and kindness so that we can be like true friends to tell your friend or even enemy to all sentient beings are the equal of love in their life. So Buddhism teaches to respect the lives to each other. Thus, Buddhism is the philosophy, but not just a philosophy. It is the supreme philosophy, I can say like that. And also the people ask, who was the Buddha? In the year 363 BC, a baby was born into a royal family in the northern India. He grew up in the wealth and luxury, but eventually found that worldly comfort and security do not guarantee the real happiness. So he was deeply moved by the suffering to saw all around and resolved to find the key to human happiness. When he was 29 years old, he left his wife and his child and set forth to renounce the world and sit under the feet of the great religious teacher of the day to learn from them, from many schools, from many teachers or guru. They taught him much, but none really known to the cause of human suffering or how it could be overcome, that kind of suffering or problem of life. So eventually, after 6 years study and meditation, he had an experience, self-investigation, in which all ignorance falls away, and he suddenly understood the ultimate truth. From that day onwards, he was called the Buddha, the awakened one. He lived for the another 45 years, in which time he traveled all over the northern India, teaching his uh, way of practice that we call Dhamma, or the way of life. Um, that the thing what he has discovered. His compassion and patience were legendaries, and he made thousands of followers in his 80 years of age. Um, he got sick because, like a normal people, he has old age, sickness, but still happy and at peace. He finally died at the age of 80, left no successors, but the teaching that we call Dhamma and Vinaya, what he have taught, will be the teacher, will be the master instead of him. And I have been asked the question more. Um, that's in the Western world, the Western idea that they have the question in their mind, or the curious, that was in the responsible for the Buddha to walk out on his wife and child. So he left the palace when he was 29 years old to search the truth. It could have been an easy thing for the Buddha to leave his family. He must have worried and hesitated a long time before finally leaving. But he had a choice, dedicating himself to his family or dedicating himself to the whole world. In the end, his great compassion made him give himself to the whole world. So he renounced the world out of compassion, and the whole world still benefits from his sacrifice. It was not irresponsible, it was perhaps the most significant sacrifice ever made. And the people should understand that the thing that normal people cannot do, but the most difficulty in the normal life of the people, that the Buddha or the Siddhartha prince, he renounced the world and find out the answer for the world. The Buddha is there, so how can he help us? Is also the question. I can compare that, like a Faraday who discovered electricity is dead, but what he discovered still help us. Louis Pasteur, who discovered the cures for many diseases, is dead, but his medication still works. still save the lives for all people in the world. And a great artist like Leonardo da Vinci is dead, but what he created can still uplift and give joy. Noblemen and heroes may have been dead for centuries, but when we read of their deeds and achievements, we can still be inspired to act as they did. Yes, the Buddha is dead about 2,600 years ago, but later his teaching still helped people. His example still inspired. Later, his teaching still help the people and still exist. His words still change lives to the people who practice. Only a Buddha could have just power century after his death. Was the Buddha a god? Is the concept of the Western people has been asked in many school or college who just came to the temple and explore what the Buddhism is. And I can answer no. Buddha was not God. He did not claim that he was a God, the child of God, or even the messengers from a God. He was a human being who perfected himself and taught that if we follow his example, we could perfect ourselves also. So everyone can be a Buddha as he did practice according to his investigation, he experienced and open to us and follow his path, and then everyone can reach the final goal. If Buddha is not God, when, why do people worship him? Or this is the concept of worship or uh, show respect to the Buddha or to the um, that what they call the worship images of the Buddha. There are different types of worship. When someone worships a god, they praise and honor him or her, makes difference and ask for favors, believing that the god will hear their praise, receive their offerings, and answer their prayers. Buddhists do not indulge in this kind of worship. The other kinds of worship is when we show respect to someone or something we admire. When a teacher walks into the rooms, we stand up. When we meet dignitary or shakes their hands. When we when the national anthem is played, we salute. They are all gestures of respect and worship and indicate our admiration for certain person or things. This is the types of worship. Buddhists practice a statue of Buddha with its hands raised gently in its lap, and its compassionate smile remind us to strive to develop peace and love within ourselves. The perfume of incense reminds us of the prevailing influence of the virtue. The lamp reminds us of the light of knowledge, and the flowers, which soon fade and die, remind us of the impermanence. When we bow down, we impress, we express outwardly what we feel inwardly. Our gratitude to the Buddha for what his teachings have given us. It is the nature of Buddhist worship. But I have heard people say that Buddhists worship idols. This is the question that has been asked because some people come to the temple and see the ceremony or ritual, something they're never familiar with. Such statements only reflect the misunderstanding of the person who makes them. The dictionary defines as idol as the image or statues worshipped as a god. As we have seen, Buddhists do not believe that the Buddha was a god. So, how could they possibly believe that the piece of wood or metal is a god? All religions use symbols to express various concepts. In Taoism, the yin and yang is used to symbolize the harmony between opposites. In Sikhism, the sword is used to symbolize spiritual struggle. In Christianity, feast is used to symbolize the Christ present, while the cross is used to symbolize his sacrifice. And in Buddhism, the statues of Buddha is used to symbolize human perfection. The statues of Buddha also remind us of the human dimension. In Buddhist teaching, in fact, the Buddhism is human-centered rather than God-centered. That we must look within, not with out to find the perfection and understanding. So to say that Buddhist worship idol is not correct. Why do people do all kind of strange things in Buddhist temples? Many things seem strange to us when we don't understand them. Rather than dismiss just things as strange, we should try to find out what they mean. However, it is true that Buddhist practices, some things have their origins in popular superstitions and misunderstanding rather than the teaching of the Buddha. And just misunderstandings are not found in Buddhism alone, but arise in all religions from time to time. The Buddha taught with clarity and in details, and if some fail to understand fully, the Buddha cannot be blamed. There is saying, if a person suffering from a disease does not seek treatment, even when there is physicians at home, It is not the fault of that physician. In the same way, if a person is oppressed and tormented by the disease of the defilements, but does not seek the health of the Buddha, that is not the Buddha's fault. No, should Buddhism or any religions be judged by those who don't practice it properly? If you wish to know the true teachings of the Buddhism, read the Buddha words and speak to those who understand them properly. If Buddhism is so good, why are some Buddhist countries poor? It's quite questions, strange questions. If we poor, you means economically poor, then it is true that some Buddhist countries are poor. But if by poor you mean the poor qualities of life, then perhaps some Buddhist countries are quite rich. Americans, for example, is an economically rich and powerful country, but the crime rate is one of the highest in the world. Millions of old people are neglected by their children and died of loneliness in old people house. Domestic violence and child abuse are major problems. Once in 3 marriages end in divorce, and pornography is a major industry. Rich is turns to many, but perhaps poor in terms of the qualities of life. Now take traditional Buddhist countries. Some are economically backward, but parents are honored and respected by their children. The crime rates are relatively low. Divorce and suicides are almost unheard of. Domestic violence and child abuse, pornography and sexual license are not common. Economically backward, but perhaps a higher qualities of life than in the country like America or some rich country in Europe. But even if we judge Buddhist countries in terms of economics alone, one of the wealthiest and most economically dynamic countries in the world today is Japan, where a large percentage of the populations call themselves Buddhists. While it is what you don't often hear of charitable works being done by Buddhists, perhaps it is because Buddhists does not feel the need to advertise about the good they do. Several years ago, the Japanese Buddhist leader Nico Niwano received the Templation Prize for this work in promoting interreligious harmony. Likewise, Thai Buddhist monks was recently awarded by the prestigious Magsaysay Prize for these excellent works among drugs addicted. In 1987, another Thai monk, Venerable Kanya Papiwata, was awarded by Norwegian Children Peace Prize for his many years of work helping homeless children in rural areas. And what about the larger scale social works being done among the poor in India by the Western British Order? They have built schools, child meeting centers, um, dispensary, and small scale industry for self-sufficiency. Buddhists see health even to others as an example for their religious practice, just as other religions do. But they believe that this should be done quietly and without self-promotion. Thus, you don't hear so much about the charitable work. Why are there so many different types of Buddhism? There are many different types of sugar: brown sugar, white sugar, granulated sugar, rock sugar, syrup, and icing sugar. But it is all sugar and it's all tastes sweet. It is produced in different way, different form, so that it can be used in different ways. Buddhism is like that. There is Theravada Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, Joka Vajra Buddhism, and Vajrayana Buddhism. But they are all Buddhism. And they all has the same taste. The state of freedom, Buddhism has evolved into different forms so that it can be relevant to the different cultures in which it exists. It has been reinterpreted over the centuries so that it can remain relevant to each new generation. Outwardly, the types of Buddhism may seem very different, but at the center of all of them is the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path. All major religious, Buddhism included, have split into schools and sects. But the different sects of Buddhism have never gone to war with each other. They have never been towards each other. And to this day, they go to each other temples and worship together. Chat tolerance and understandings are certainly rare. Buddhism started in India, but it eventually died out there. Why? The Buddha's teachings grew to become one of the India's major religions, but gradually it went into decline and finally disappeared, just as Christianity started in Palestine, but eventually died out there. No one really knows why this happened. Perhaps a combination of political and social changes combined with wars and invasion made it difficult just a gentle and peaceful religious to survive. However, long before it disappeared in India, it spread from there to the furthermost corners of Asia. You certainly think highly of Buddhism. I suppose you think your religious is right and all the other are wrong. No. Buddhists who understand the Buddha's teachings think that other religions are wrong. No. No one who has made a genius effort to examine other religions with an open mind could think like that either. The first thing you notice when you study in different religions is just how much they have in common. All religions acknowledge that mankind's present state is unsatisfactory. All believe that a change of attitudes and behavior is needed if the human situation is to improve. All teach an ethics that includes love, kindness, patience, generosity, and social responsibility, and all accept an existence of some form of absolute. They use different languages, different names, and different symbols to describe and explain these things. And it is only when they narrow-mindedly relate to their one way of seeing things that religions, intolerance, pride, and self-righteousness arise. Imagine an enlightenment, a freshman, a Chinese, and Indonesians all looking to a cup. The Englishman say that's a cup. The Frenchman answer, no, it's not. It is a taxi. The Chinese comment, you are both wrong. It's a pet. And the Indonesian laugh at the other to say, what fool you are is kawan. The Englishman gets dictionaries and show it to the other saying, I can prove that is a cup. My dictionary says so. Then your dictionary is wrong, say the Frenchman, because my dictionary clearly says it is Tese. The Chinese scoffed at them. My dictionary, thousands of years old than you. So my dictionary must be right. And besides, more people speak Chinese than any other language. So it must be a pet. Whilst they are sub-explaining and arguing with each other, a Buddhist come up and drink from a cup. After he has drunk, he said to others, whatever you call it a cup, a disease, a pet, or a kawan, a cup is meant to be used. Stop arguing and drink. Stop scrabbling and refresh your thirst. That is the Buddhist attitude to other religions. I have read that Buddhism is just a type of foremost Hinduism. One sometimes hears uninformed people saying this, but we read in Buddhist scriptures that the Hindu priests, the Brahmins, were strongly opposed to the Buddha. It is because he criticized Hindus' caste system and the practice animal sacrifice. He denied the existence of Supreme God and he rejected the authority of Hindu scriptures. Buddhism and Hinduism have things in common, but they also have enough important differences to make them two distinct religions. Is Buddhism scientific? Before we answer that question, it would be best to define the word science. Science, according to the dictionary, is knowledge which can be made into a system, which depends upon seeing and testing facts and stating general natural laws. A branch of just knowledge. anything that can be studied exactly. There are aspects of Buddhism that would not fit into this definition, but the central teachings of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths, most certainly would. Suffering, the first noble truth, and experience then can be defined. Experience and mission. The second noble truth states that suffering has a natural case. Craving, which likewise can be defined. Experienced and measured. No attempt to made to explain suffering in terms of metaphysical concepts or myth. Suffering is ended according to the third noble truth, not by relying upon a supreme being, by faith or by prayer, but simply by removing its cause. That is examining the Four Noble Truths. The way to end suffering once again has nothing to do with metaphysics, but depends on behaving in specific way. And once again, behavior is open to testing. Buddhism dispenses with the concept of a supreme being, as does science, and explain the origins and working of the universe in terms of natural laws. All of this certainly exhibits as a scientific spirit. Once again, the Buddha's constant strict advice that we should not blindly believe, but rather question, examine, inquire, and rely on our own experience has to definite scientific ring to it. He says, do not go by revelation or tradition, do not go by rumor, and the sacred scriptures do not go by hearsay or mere logic, do not go by bias towards a nation or to another person's seeming ability, and do not go by the idea he is our teacher, but when you yourself know that a thing is good, that is not blamable. That is praised by the wise, and when practiced and observed, that is lead to happiness when follow that thing. So, because the Buddhism is not entirely scientific, it certainly has a strong scientific overtone, and is certainly more scientific than any other religion. It is science. It is significant that Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of the 12th century, said of Buddhism. The religions of future will be a cosmic religion. It should transcend a personal God and avoid dogmas and theory, covering both the natural and the spiritual. It should be based on a religious sense arising from the experience of all things natural and spiritual, and a meaningful unity. Buddhism answers this description if there is an religion that would cope with modern scientific needs. it would be Buddhism.